Last week, a family I saw in clinic told me, "We've been doing cry it out." When I asked them to explain what they meant, it turned out the approach they'd tried before visiting the clinic was not even close to cry it out. And that got me wondering, why do so many parents not know what cry it out actually means? Well, it didn't take long to figure this out. In this episode, you're going to learn what cry it out actually means and learn why we haven't ever suggested a family try it. Welcome back to Brand New Little People, the podcast companion to the Sombel Pediatric Sleep Clinic programs created by us. I'm Dr. Fallon Cook and I'm here with Dr. Laura Conway. We are PhDs and sleep practitioners and co-directors of Infant Sleep Australia. Laura, how's your week been?
Yeah, it's been good, thank you. I actually had a really nice, productive weekend this weekend, doing things around the house that I'd been putting off for ages. And
good.
So I'm feeling really smug today, knowing that I've cleaned behind the fridge and, and cleaned the coffee machine.
Love it. Love it. I love starting the week feeling, really, really organised. My husband's home sick today, and I was like, now here are a few things you can do. I don't care that you're sick. I've been sick before and I still clean the house. So he's currently sorting washing, which is always a bit of an experiment because we never know what clothes each child's going to end up with. There's usually a bit of mismatch crossover, but that's all right. He'll do his best. We'll figure it out later.
Yeah. Did you have a nice weekend?
Yeah, I did. I took one of my dogs to his first ever private dog training class. So this is like a one-on-one thing because he's a bit of an idiot when he's around other dogs. I was like, right, we need someone to just help, just us, or it's going to be complete chaos. So went and did that, and it was actually really nice because it kind of felt like I was just doing something, without the kids tagging along, just me and little George the Whippet. So that was really fun.
Did he do okay?
He did really well, actually. Yeah, I was really surprised. So, yeah, there's hope, apparently.
Oh, good.
Maybe one day he won't be such an idiot. He's gorgeous, but just very overexcited. So, yeah.
Well, maybe that's going to be a new avenue, Fallon. If I can't imagine that things will, will get to the point where parents don't need support with their children, but perhaps you should be paying close attention to what the dog trainer is suggesting, and you could do some puppy training in the future.
I had a really interesting discussion with him. He was saying, my partner is a psychologist and that she often talks to him about how often, a lot of the strategies they use with dogs are similar strategies to what you use with toddlers. It really is similar in that you're trying to really encourage the good things.
Yes.
Yes, it was very interesting. But no, it was a lovely, lovely weekend.
Good.
And here we are again, episode 93. We're creeping up to episode 100.
Oh, my goodness. Amazing. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. Jeez, 93. And some listeners have listened to all of them. And well done if you were one of those listeners.
That amazes me. Someone the other day in a call was saying, your voice has just filled our house for all these months of us becoming parents. It's been your voice echoing around the house. And I think, oh my God, you poor thing. I'm so sorry.
I know. Can you imagine our kids, if they knew that, they'd just be rolling their eyes oh my God, people are actually making a voluntary choice to listen to our mum's voices.
Yeah. Oh, it's hilarious. Well, we decided to dive into something a bit meaty this week. After, I saw a family the other week who were like, we've been doing cry it out. And I was like, just talk me through what you mean by that. And it really got me thinking that this family, like so many others, are kind of using that term incorrectly because they've been led to believe that it means something that it actually doesn't. And I thought, let's start to unpack a bit of that and really explore what is cry it out, because I feel like a lot of parents don't actually know. Laura, do you want to tell us what is cry it out?
Yeah, so cry it out is quite an old-fashioned approach to approaching baby and toddler sleep, and what it means is putting your baby or toddler into their cot or bed at bedtime, leaving the room, shutting the door, and not returning at all until morning time.
I think I can hear in the distant parents' minds just going... Like,
Yes.
what?
Yeah.
No, that's not what I mean. But that is actually what
That
it is.
is.
It's
Yeah.
not responding at all
Yeah.
to a child overnight until morning, no matter how extreme things get.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I would say what parents usually think cry it out means is just any attempt to settle their baby in the cot where the baby might cry, which is
Yeah.
just it's not the same thing.
No, not the
So
same at all.
I've heard people say that they're using cry it out when actually they are settling their baby in the cot, but they're patting them constantly, or they're, sitting in the room and singing to them. Or I even had one time who thought she was using cry it out because she'd stopped feeding the baby to sleep, but was rocking them to sleep in her arms. And I'm like,
Mm, that is
no, no, no,
not. No.
that's not cried out, not at all. And I think it's really important that we use these terms correctly,
Yeah.
just because of where this confusion came
Mm,
from. And
yeah.
it is a bit of an interesting thing when we start to unpack it. Why do
Mm.
you think this confusion came about, Laura?
I think that there are some individuals who have banded together now into groups who have an agenda, perhaps, where they feel that doing any kind of cot settling is wrong. And, sometimes we call them the anti-cot settling groups. And
Mm,
for whatever reason, they become very upset at themselves at the thought of a baby or a toddler crying at all, no matter what. And because they see that when you change how a baby or toddler settles or settles to sleep, or when they go to sleep, that they can communicate that through crying, these people think, well, that means that it's something bad. Crying is bad. Therefore, it is absolutely wrong to make those changes because crying equals bad. Exactly what their agenda is, well, we can only speculate. But they want parents to stop doing anything that causes any crying because of a misunderstanding of what crying means. And they then use kind of fear mongering. They want to capture any approaches at all, even really supportive approaches to teaching your
mm,
child how to settle, under this banner of cry it out. And so they will sow these little seeds of incorrect information, that
mm,
if your child is crying at all around bedtime, that means that you are using cry it out. And they lump everything together, any kind, as you're saying, even those parents who are coming in and saying they think that they are using cry out because they have stopped feeding to sleep and they're rocking their baby to sleep in their arms.
mm.
And they then feel that, oh no, that they've been told that this is cry out and that's going to cause damage because any crying is bad. And so these groups have just created this environment where parents are so fearful that they're doing something wrong, that they therefore won't do
Mm.
anything at all because they just do not want that crying, because crying equals
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, I think the term cried out has kind of been hijacked. And
Mm,
now, if your baby cries at all, well, it must be cried out.
yeah.
And because parents do equate cried out with being harmful, it's making a lot of parents really, really scared, and unnecessarily so, because when a baby makes an adjustment to anything in their environment, whether it's getting used to riding in a pram or a car seat, or getting used to having their nappy changed, or like really anything like that, often they'll show their displeasure in the whole thing by crying. And our job as parents is not to go, oh no, it made them cry, well, we're never potty training, we're never taking them in the car, we're never changing the nappy. It's not to avoid it, it's to support them through those
Mm,
changes. And when something like cot settling can be done in such a gradual, gentle, supportive way, it's awful when someone's just trying to label it all as cry it out,
yes.
because it just brings up so much fear for parents, like, oh, maybe this is what I'm doing is harmful, when what they're doing is actually really wonderful supportive parenting. And
Yeah.
there need not be any fear or worry at all.
And I think also what has happened is that the groups have really focused on those awful situations many, many years ago where children, babies and toddlers were left to cry in orphanages in
Mm.
cots for hours and hours at a time, morning,
Days.
noon, and night, for days
Mm.
and months on end, and were neglected. And studies have been conducted of those individuals who had their early start in life in such places. And they have psychological damage. They
Mm.
have been damaged, and they needing all kinds of supports to facilitate them participating in everyday life as they have got older. And that is not what is happening in the home generally of parents in Australia, in the UK, in other loving environments. Most parents are very, very loving, and they, however, are so fearful because these groups have taken those very real findings of what happens when children are neglected and are
Neglected.
they're
Yeah.
neglected, yeah, and they are left in their cots to cry it out for, as you say, weeks, months, and then they are taking those findings and trying to put them into the situation of babies and toddlers in loving homes, and
Mm.
saying, if you do anything, it's cry it out. It's as bad as leaving a child for months in a cot crying, being neglected.
Mm.
And it's just fear mongering. And then we find that parents are just very, very scared of
Yeah.
causing damage to their children. And it's just really, the two things are just not comparable.
It's so maddening, isn't it? Like, it's just so wildly unethical. And it's often dressed up as these people kind of dress it up like, oh, we care so much about all the babies and we care so much about the parents. Mm.
Yeah.
When you look at what's being said, you're not helping anyone. You're
No.
really not. And no good quality health professional is going to blanket, ban or disparage every possible approach to solving what are very real problems. I mean, let's not forget that sleep disorders exist. There are
Yeah.
diagnostic manuals. These are real things. And no good health professional, no ethical health professional is going to just be like, no, we shouldn't do any of that. I think that is a really good red flag to look out for. To be like someone saying, no, we shouldn't treat diabetes at all. Let nature take its course. Like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
would sound unhinged. And that's what is happening in this situation as well, because often this advice has a drastically awful impact on parent mental health. Um, and can really impact babies and toddlers as well if they are, just waking up a hideous number of times per night. They're never getting good quality rest. They're always exhausted, and their parents are just, an exhausted shell of themselves, where often those parents will say, I know I'm not able to parent very effectively, and I'm not being the loving parent I want to be because I'm just at the end of my tether. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are not putting your child into their cot at night, walking out, shutting the door, and leaving them until morning, if you're not doing that, you are not doing cry it out.
Yeah, to be very, very clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And, you're doing whatever it is you're doing. If you are, maybe you're putting your baby down, you're waiting a couple of minutes to see, like, give them time. Can they get themselves off to sleep? They're going to fuss a bit. They might cry a bit. If you are monitoring them, keeping an eye on them, you're doing a great job. You're doing a really good job. You're supporting them to get used to something different, but it's not something harmful. There's, falling asleep in a cot doesn't do any kind of harm to a baby.
No, that's
And I
right.
think, yeah, often we lose sight of that.
Mm.
So cried out, back to cried out. So that's where you put your baby down, you leave the entire night, you don't under any circumstances return until morning. We have never ever once suggested that a family does that.
No.
Why wouldn't we suggest that, Laura?
There's just no need. There's no need to do that. We can give our little ones lots and lots of support as they learn what it's like to be in an environment which is new to them. And parents mostly prefer to give their babies support as they learn how to fall asleep in their cot. And that's absolutely fair enough. And we can give them advice about what kind of support they would feel happy to give their babies. Do they want to
Mm,
get them very drowsy in their arms first before putting them down? Do they want to pop them in the bassinet before they're asleep and gently rock their bodies or pat them or stroke their faces? Do they want to just sit beside the cot for 30 seconds before they um, uh, pat them again? What is it that is going to be useful for them? How are they going to feel comfortable? How are they what approach are they going to be able to commit to? Um, and
mm,
we know that babies don't learn any quicker being left for long periods of time alone in their cot.
mm.
We don't need it, just simply is not necessary in the vast majority of cases to leave babies by themselves for long stretches in their cot.
Yeah, absolutely. There's such a, if we think about it, excuse me, there being sort of two ends of a continuum where you've got doing absolutely nothing at one end. So maybe your baby is, waking up 6, 7, 8 times per night. You're exhausted, sleep's very fragmented, and you do absolutely nothing. So you just put up with that. You continue going with that. That's down one end of the spectrum, just kind of doing nothing. And then way up the other end is cried out, which is really putting them in the room, walking away, and that's it. I think so often in the online space, we're told that they're the options: do nothing or
Yeah,
do cry it out,
yeah.
which again, totally absurd. There are 100 shades of grey in
Mm-hmm.
between those two. And any good health professional is going to help you explore all of those shades of grey to find, well, which one of these, I'm gesticulating a lot, aren't I? It's a bit
Yeah.
stupid in the context of a podcast. But anyway, maybe the 10 people who watch on YouTube will enjoy it. But yeah, our job is to help you as a parent work out which one of these shades of grey is the best fit for your baby and their temperament and their
Mm-hmm.
sleep needs. Which one feels like something, yeah, you can commit to consistently so that it's we're not, chopping and changing all the time and confusing the baby. That's the role. So that's why I say anyone who just rules out a whole bunch of approaches is a little crazy, and it is a bit of a red flag, because it just that's wild to me. Like, our
Yeah.
job is to help parents find what feels manageable for them and their baby.
Mm.
So having said that, there are so many different approaches. We really specialize in those shades of grey and
Yeah.
helping parents find what's going to work for them and their baby to have really, really good sleep health. And that's the goal at the end of the day. But
Mm.
I think what's really interesting is to talk about when cry it out might be appropriate. And I think a lot of listeners will be going, what? No, it's never appropriate. And I totally hear you on that. But then I
Yeah.
heard something one day. It's something you learnt, Laura, through your training.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, that is a really, really good point, that there might, very, very rarely, there might actually be a situation where that approach could be suggested by a sleep doctor. So tell
Yeah.
us more about that.
Yeah. So, as you say, very rare. We never suggest using it, but there may be some really extenuating circumstances where it is appropriate, and those situations would be perhaps in out of home care situations, foster care situations, where the child is likely to lose their placement. The placement is likely to fail if they continue to have the really fragmented sleep, which is then impacting the whole household. Now, when we think about a out of home care or foster care placement failing, what we are thinking about is a child who has a fragmented family base. They're already a very vulnerable child who may have been placed in a loving foster home, perhaps along with siblings, trying to keep all the children together, and they have been placed with a trusted foster caregiver, and the systems around this child are doing everything to keep them alongside their siblings and in a loving, appropriate home. When that fails, that can mean that the child loses being with their siblings, loses being with a loving, registered caregiver. And in those instances, it can not only do damage to the child, losing those connections, it can also do damage to the caregiver, the foster caregiver, who wants to provide care to this child, but the poor sleep, and sometimes, if that is 6, 8, 12 times a night on repeat for weeks and months on end, they are really suffering too. And often foster carers will have more than one foster child in their care, so there's a whole the whole group. There's more than one person being impacted, and that parent then is having to think, how can I support the majority in this household situation?
Yeah.
And in that situation, if one of the options is either I send this child, this foster placement fails, and the foster organisation has to find another home for this child, or I do cry it out. At that point, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. So as you can see, it's a really extenuating circumstance that in that type of situation where the two choices are so awful, there may be a place to use cry it out. It's the best of two evils in that situation.
Yeah, I think you've described that really, really well, Laura. And I think also it's usually not practitioner driven, that decision. It's usually a foster carer saying, I am done. I cannot do one more night. I cannot do something gradual. I cannot do something, supportive. I'm so done with this. And they're asking for permission. Can I just put this child down and not go back in? In which case, a practitioner would be saying, you can, but monitor them. Have a monitor. Keep an eye on them. If things are getting too out of control, this is how what you're going to do. But it predominantly is caregiver driven, that kind of decision. And we've worked with foster families. It's not that every foster family gets to this point.
No.
Most of the foster families we've worked with have chosen one of those shades of grey where they're, giving some support and they're helping them make that transition. And that's worked beautifully. So these are really very, very rare circumstances. I'm denied about whether or not we would even touch on that in this podcast because there's probably a bunch of trolls waiting to come for our necks.
Yeah.
But the reason why I bring it up is because I really trust our listener base, and I think that they will find this sort of discussion interesting. But I think it really opens eyes because it's very easy to just look at your version of parenting and think, well, why? I would never do cry it out, so why would anyone? And I think it's a really important thing that we as parents start to think about the fact that everybody is having a very, very different experience of things. And it really comes back to just, we can't judge parents for the decisions that they make. Everybody is kind of, following their own path, I guess. And I think that it is helpful to think that, sometimes there are extremely extenuating circumstances, which is why we're not going online and saying cry it out is absolutely the worst thing in the world, because we acknowledge that whilst extremely rare, sometimes there can be a place for something like that. So I hope this discussion has been interesting, and maybe as a listener it's opened your eyes a bit to thinking about how you use that term cry it out. Do we really want to let the anti-cot settling people have their way and kind of let's start to use that term properly. If you say cry it out, make sure you explain what you mean, and really use it correctly, because I think we can all, working together, start to really turn the tide on how that term is used, and we'll be able to stop people from using it incorrectly to refer to any kind of cot settling. And I think that takes a bit of power back away from those groups that seem really intent on, telling parents what to do using fear-mongering tactics. And I'm all for that.
Yes.
I think we need to take back that power.
Definitely.
Is there anything you'd add to that discussion, Laura?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I hope, as you do, that it's interesting for our listeners. And yeah, as I say, the vast majority of our listeners aren't going to be using Cry It Out. We do not suggest using Cry It Out. And that said, working on cot settling where there can be crying because you're changing how a child goes to sleep when they prefer a different method is absolutely appropriate. And there are those shades of grey that you can choose from that are going to suit your family and your child's temperament. And that's absolutely fine.
Love it. What a great way to round that out. All right. Well, we've got a few parent questions this week. Not too many, which is interesting for a change. We don't have sort of 14. I think we've got
Yeah.
about, what have we got? 4. Gosh, that feels so manageable. It's like the early days. Love
Yeah.
it.
Shall I
All
kick us
right.
off?
Yeah, go for
Yeah.
it.
So Claire and Jason have written in, and they have a 6-month-old baby. They're using supported accelerated approach, and they have chosen to wean off the dummy. And used that supported accelerated approach to support with that, and they've had noticeable improvements. That's great. So they are now working on reducing night feeds from 2 or 3 a night to just the 1, because they found that when their baby was having lots of feeds overnight, it was impacting his morning appetite. And we do see that quite often, that lots of feeds means babies aren't interested in their brekkie. So their current strategy is to settle their baby if he wakes up before 1 a.m. using the supported accelerated approach. Then they offer him a feed the first time he wakes up after 1. But they're a bit concerned that this inconsistency might be confusing their baby. So they want to know, is it confusing that sometimes he's settled using supported accelerated, but once a night he's fed when he wakes? Or is it appropriate to carry on doing what they're doing?
I really love this question. And the short answer is no, it's probably not confusing. So, the circadian rhythm includes calorie intake, not just sleep. So, by feeding at sort of 1 a.m. or later, your baby's circadian rhythm is kind of picking up on there being some calories coming, at 1 a.m. or sometime afterwards. So often when parents practice something like this for a week, their baby's body starts to kind of figure out, okay, I don't really need to wake before 1. There's not really anything interesting on offer. There's certainly no feeds, no calories. And so they're more likely to resettle and then wake later in the night when their body is expecting those calories. So you've approached that perfectly, Claire and Jason, by just having a clear time. I always suggest this to parents because it's like, if your baby wakes up, you glance at the clock and you kind of go, oh no, this is a resettle. And in that case, you might send in the non-breastfeeding parent to do the resettle. Often they respond a bit better to that than if the breastfeeding parent turns up and doesn't offer the feed.
Yes.
And yeah, and it just makes it easy. You glance at the clock, you immediately know whether or not you're going to do the feed, and then you do it. Having said that, there are some babies where for as long as there's one feed overnight, they just seem to keep waking up all the time, checking, is it time yet? Is it time yet? Is it time yet?
Yes.
And in those cases, that's when we would suggest, if they're old enough, they're gaining weight well, they're on solid foods, it's probably time to wean that last overnight feed. And then a couple of nights later, they tend to just be sleeping through really nicely. So, yeah, long answer, but the short answer is that no, it's absolutely fine what you're doing.
Yeah. Good. All right.
Okay, shall I read out Tom's question?
Yeah.
So Tom has a 2-year-old son who began waking 3 or 4 times a night with distressed crying for up to an hour, starting around 4 months ago. He'd previously been sleeping through the night from 14 months of age. After using the Sonbel toddler program, his night wakes reduced to just 1 or none, and settling became a lot quicker. Tom says last week they moved him into a bunk bed with his older sister, and since then he hasn't woken once. His sleep need has even increased by 30 minutes. He's getting about 30 minutes extra a day. Obviously loves to share the room with his sister, which is lovely. So Tom wants to know, is this just a coincidence, or maybe were they actually dealing with some separation anxiety, I guess over those months when he was waking quite a lot? Could there have been separation anxiety that they just weren't recognizing? What do you think, Laura?
I think that it was probably a coincidence, obviously, without knowing all of the ins and outs of what was happening. The fact that your son was waking up multiple times and taking an hour to resettle overnight, it's really indicative to me that there was something not quite right about the sleep pressure. Because
Mm,
even if it had been an anxiety issue, um, a length of time that's so extended overnight is unlikely due to a anxious response. So I think
mm,
probably using the toddler program, you were able to determine what his sleep needs were, and you helped to drive up that sleep pressure, which then made it easier for him to resettle more quickly overnight. Um, that said, some children do just love company, and when they are in the new room with their sibling, it does feel a little bit. For some children, it can feel a little bit nicer, a little bit more cozy,
mm.
and it doesn't mean that they had the separation anxiety beforehand. It's just this is quite nice sleeping with a sibling,
Yeah.
and then you might find that. That a child who is in a room with a sibling can happily doze or lie quietly in bed for a little bit longer whilst looking
Mm.
across or looking or just knowing that the older sister is just on the mattress below them. They don't have that urge to get up really quickly to go and play and find their sibling at somewhere else in the house. So
Yes.
that could be
Yeah.
why. Mm.
I think never underestimate the power of the influence of an older sibling. I think often we
Mm.
forget that, this child is 2 years old. So, really understanding what's going on around him. And if he's noticed that his sister is quiet in bed, sleeping all night, there's that real power of the social influence where a 2 year old will start to go, "Oh, I want to fit in amongst my peers." And we see this at childcare all the time,
Yes.
like these toddlers
Yeah.
who normally like scream and carry on and have big tantrums at nap time. At childcare, they're like, "Oh, better not do that. No one else
Yeah.
is doing that. I'll just be this lovely, calm child who goes to sleep nicely." And of course, parents are completely like flummoxed, like, "What on earth?" So I think maybe this 2 year old has just gone, "Oh, in this environment, we don't wake up and call out a lot. We sleep quietly." And they kind of often are looking up to their older sibling as an example that they want to follow because they want to be like the big kid too. Yeah, it's very interesting, these sorts of dynamics that arise when you've
Mm.
got multiple children. I've definitely seen that in my own family. The way the
Yes.
3 kids I've got will sort of influence each other and what they do.
Yes.
So, look, Tom, I'm just thrilled to hear that you've got a 2 year old who's sleeping so nicely,
Yeah.
and you've got them in the same room together and they're doing well, because I think there are some lovely sibling bonds that really flourish when siblings share rooms. Not always possible to have them together, but it sounds like it's gone really well for you, which is brilliant.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so we have a question from another Claire. This is Claire E. So Claire has a toddler who is 3 years and 3 months old, who is sometimes skipping her daytime nap. So on no nap days, they put her to bed at 6:30 to 6:45 because she's really quite cranky and seems really tired from around 5 p.m. But Claire says this results in early morning wake-ups between 4:45 and 5 a.m. That's no fun for anyone.
No.
When she naps, her bedtime is later. It's more like 7:45 to 8 p.m. And she typically slept for 10 hours a night, and the nap used to be 30 or 40 minutes long. So Claire wants to know, on days without a nap, should they push bedtime later, for example, to 7:30 to try and avoid the early wakes, or would this risk overtiredness?
Okay, there's a lot I want to unpack with this
Mm.
one. So let's start with overtiredness and let's just throw it in the bin because we don't need to worry about overtiredness in a 3 year old. Really, we worry about overtiredness in babies under 12 weeks of age, and the older they get, the less we care about overtiredness. Because over time they're building up sleep pressure. So even if they become really cranky and overwrought and not very fun to be around, they've got that increase in sleep pressure or sleep drive that is going to help them fall asleep. At over 3 years of age, I would say it's just time. If she's sometimes not having a nap and other times is having a nap, it's just time to cut the nap so that you can get some consistency and we don't have bedtime then just moving around all over the place. So I would, probably go with just cutting that nap. And what you'll find is it will be hard at first. There'll be some days when she really wants it, seems to really need it, but push through without it. And you can teach her circadian rhythm that we just don't have that opportunity to nap anymore. And she's probably going to do better just having a consistently longer nighttime period of sleep. It'll consolidate. She'll, in all likelihood, adjust really well to that. I think the other question then that Claire E has is, how do we move that bedtime later so that wake up is also later? Because it's going to be tricky at first. What I would say is try not to be scared when your toddler or preschooler actually is getting really tired at that 5 p.m. mark, because a lot of kids become very hangry at that time. It's a combination of my body is feeling really tired. I've got all this physical fatigue. I'm really hungry. My body is expecting pretty soon to be having what's usually the biggest meal of the day. And it's just normal for them to just be at the end of their tether by the end of the day. So it is completely safe and fine to start pushing that bedtime gradually later. So if it's currently mostly around 6:30 p.m., then for a few days you're going to aim for 6:45 p.m. After another few days, and this is with dropping the nap, then you're going to aim for 7 p.m. You're just going to keep shuffling it along and know that it doesn't matter how overwrought she is in the lead up to bedtime. It's actually really unlikely that it's going to have a drastic impact on the quality of the nights. Nights might go up and down a little bit temporarily, but she'll move past that. And before you know it, she'll be sleeping straight through to morning again.
Yeah.
I've gone down all the garden paths, Laura. Is there anything you'd add to that one?
Just to highlight to Claire that on the days that her 3-year-old is having a nap, it's only sometimes a 30-minute, 40-minute nap anyway. So it's not like you're reducing, cutting out a 2-hour stretch of sleep in the middle of the day. She really is just down to a very short nap anyway, one sleep cycle. So it's unlikely that it's going to be really tricky for very long. If it was a 2-hour nap, well, would be titrating it down, rather not going from 2 hours to none anyway. But she's very nearly there herself, Claire. And sometimes what would be happening now, I imagine, is that she's having that nap. On some days, then she goes to bed a bit later, which means she wakes up a bit later, and then she doesn't have the sleep drive to have the nap the next day, which means that she goes to bed a bit earlier, which means she wakes up really early, which means that you then see her as tired in the middle of the day and you give her the nap, and you're just on that roller coaster at the moment. So just think to yourself, when is it going to suit me to be able to manage with a slightly cranky preschooler for up to 5 days maybe, and pick that week and then say that's it, no nap, and then do the shuffling the bedtime like Fallon's just described.
I think that's really, really good advice. All right, and our next question comes in from someone with a beautiful Irish name, and I'm going to take a guess at how to pronounce it, and then Laura, with your Irish heritage, you can tell me how terribly wrong I got it. Okay, my guess is it Eve?
I think it's Aoife.
Aoife. Oh, see, I saw the F and I was like, I think an F is... I should know. My name is Fallon, actually, so that's Irish.
Yeah,
I should know that Fs are normally Fs. Okay, Aoife. Okay.
That's
and Aoife
how I
can
would
let
have
us know if we
pronounced
butchered
it.
it.
But actually, I've always thought that's Aoife. But then again, maybe it's not. We'll probably get some messages. I'm really tempted to go into the how do you pronounce.
Yeah. Do you know how often I'm on that website before appointments? And sometimes I'll pronounce their name right and I'll check with them and it's some really unusual name. And they're so impressed that and I'm like, oh yeah, that's from Belarus, isn't it? And they're like, yes, how did you know? I'm like, Just new.
No, well,
It's actually the
my
internet.
oldest friend, who not in her age, we went to school together, but her name is Siobhan. So she's for year, her whole life, people call her all strange versions, and sometimes I call
Yeah,
her Siobhan just for a laugh.
just
Hi,
for laughs.
Siobhan. So yeah, and one of my children, and actually one of your children as well, has a name that's a little bit more unusual. So I
Mm,
think when you're aware of what it's like for people around you that you love to have their name mispronounced, it does make you a little bit more aware of others and how it might feel
yeah,
for them. And
and
no,
trying to get it
so
right.
yes, so I had just assumed it was Aoife. So Aoife, let us know, Aoife or Eve.
We'll probably find out it's like something completely different. But anyway,
It's
we're
Maeve.
doing our best. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Oh, gosh. All right. So, Aoife is a mother to a 9 month old who has been self settling for naps and bedtime since about 4.5 months of age, thanks to Sombel. Lovely. Aoife says, despite this, her baby is now waking more frequently overnight and is very difficult to resettle without a feed. The
Mm.
usual resettling technique is no longer as effective, and even when her baby is resettled, she often wakes again within minutes after noticing that Aoife isn't there. So Aoife's wondering what can they do to improve overnight resettling without relying on feeding, given the baby's increasing difficulty and frequent wake ups.
Mm. Okay, so I sometimes feel a little bit like a stuck record, but I think what would be a really good place for you to start, Aoife, is to log your baby's sleep again and see what the current sleep need is. In all likelihood, the your baby's sleep need is going to be very different from when they were 4.5 months old. So at 9 months of age, I'd be thinking about your child just having the 2 naps during the day. So if they're still on 3 naps, I'd be reducing it to 2 naps. And then looking to see how you divvy up that sleep need across those 2 naps and the night time, because your baby knows how to go to sleep independently at the start of the night and for their naps. So if they could maintain their sleep overnight, in all likelihood they would. So I would be thinking
Mm.
that maybe there's something a little bit off about the sleep pressure, which means that it's a bit harder for your baby to maintain their sleep independently, which has meant that they have then called out to you for more support overnight than they previously did. And then when you've tried to use your settling approach that you previously used to improve their sleep, it just hasn't had the same impact, because even if you are, like, actually I was going to say, even if you are feeding to sleep, they can't maintain their sleep, which is exactly what you're experiencing. So even when you are giving like the ultimate support to go back to sleep, your baby cannot then maintain their sleep when you put them back down in the cot. So I would
Mm.
be double checking that daily rhythm, working on reducing the nap frequency, the nap duration, or making sure bedtime and wake up is appropriate. Doing that for a few days first, and you might find that then the overnight wakes fall away. If you don't, then I would be at that point coming back in and using the same settling approach again that you previously have used, because with higher sleep pressure, your baby's more likely to adjust more quickly and be able to tolerate going back to sleep in that way rather than relying on feeding.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Laura. There's definitely a sleep pressure component to things. Once you build up that sleep pressure, based on, I'm imagining this baby's probably had a bit of a drop in their sleep needs, and we just need to quickly adapt the schedule to fit
Mm.
whatever the new sleep needs are. Once you've worked on that for a few days to a week, then think about that with that settling approach. I'm wondering if Aoife might be usually staying in the room until her baby's asleep. And so this baby's now cottoned on to, oh, if I can delay falling asleep, I can kind of keep mum in the room. And sometimes
Mm.
they just doze. Instead of getting into a sleep cycle, they doze a bit so they can kind of monitor what mum or dad is up to. So once that sleep pressure is high enough again, often I'll say to parents, it might be the first nap of the day if that's a pretty easy settle. Just practice wandering out of the room after you put them down,
Mm.
because if the baby can self-settle, they probably don't really need you there. And often parents are really surprised. They're like, oh, I thought it'd be really hard, but I wandered out of the room, went to use the bathroom, and they were just asleep and it was fine and easy. So it might just be her needing a little bit of practice, falling asleep without you in the room. And then
Mm.
hopefully the nights will really come together.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, it was so nice to just go through parent questions at a more relaxed pace. I've
Yes,
loved this.
me
It's been
too.
really good. I feel like next week we'll probably have like 25 questions or something. We'll be back to our usual frenetic pace. But yeah, we'll see how we go. Thank you to everyone who has, liked our posts, shared our posts, left a lovely comment, or subscribe to the podcast. We are so grateful to everybody who supports what we do. And we hope that you found today's episode really valuable, and maybe you've had that bit of a mind blown moment learning what Cry It Out actually means. And you
Hmm.
can go out there and kind of spread the word so
Yeah.
that more parents learn about these things. And don't let people, hoodwink you into thinking that, any cot settling approach is Cry It Out. We just
Hmm.
simply can't equate the two. If you love what we do, please buy us a coffee. We'll put the link in the bio, or not in the bio, what is it? The
Show
show
notes.
notes. We'll put the link in the show notes for you. Leave us a review. Come and join Sunbell if you're needing some support. If you're a Sunbell member, you can book in for coaching calls, and there's quite a lot of availability right now. I think if you wanted to see me this week, you probably still can. I think there are a few there,
Mm.
which is pretty rare. I'm usually not available on short
No.
notice. So if you're needing that support, do reach out and book in. If you're not subscribed to the podcast yet, please do it, because it all helps in our mission to get really good education about sleep out there to parents. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and you'll hear from us again next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.